What's up gamers, Dreamcast guy here, and today is April Fool's Day, so I've decided that I'm going to try and prank all the people who like to troll my comment section and go, you know, for a guy called Dreamcast guy, you don't really review anything on the console. So today, I'm dedicating a video to you. I'm going to do something that might be absolutely impossible, but I'm going to attempt it. I'm going to review every single North American Dreamcast game in a single sitting. So here's how it's going to go down. A good buddy of mine named Tom Chardock, he wrote this book. It's a complete list of every single thing ever released on Sega Dreamcast, including a nice little checklist of everything released in North America, which I have. It's a little bit blown out because of my spotlight, but I've actually played and beaten almost every single thing ever released for the system. So I'm going through it all alphabetically, and I'm going to give each game a 1 to 10 score and tell you a little bit about it. Ready? Let's go. God, I'm probably going to die from exhaustion, but let's see if this is even possible. Alright. Game number 1, Four Wheel Thunder. It's a typical racing game, but with some cool off-road elements to it. If you can find it for pretty cheap, I definitely recommend it. I'd give it an 8 out of 10. Number 2, 4x4 Evolution. Same sort of concept, but from a different studio. I think this kicked off an entire series. I actually like it a little bit more graphically, and I feel like the worlds are a little bit better fleshed out, so I'm going to give that an 8.5. 18-Wheeler. This is a trucker racing game where you're trying to make it and deliver your cargo before time runs out. It was originally an arcade game, and it's extremely fun, but I feel like it's only really super great when you actually have the Dreamcast steering wheel. I'll give that an 8 out of 10. Moving on, we have 102 Dalmatians. There are a lot of kid games on the Dreamcast, and most of them are honestly pretty dang bad. This is unfortunately one of them. I give 102 Dalmatians a 5 out of 10. Now we're moving on to Aero Wings and Aero Wings 2. Both of these are amazing shmups. The Dreamcast as a whole has tons and tons of really good arcade-style plane shooters, and both of these are absolutely legendary. I think recently they've started porting them to Switch, and I have to say, both of them are things you absolutely need to pick up. Let me open this bottle of water. I got a feeling this video might be a couple hours long, but alright, let's get back to it. Next up is Air Force Delta. Air Force Delta is a sweet plane game. Now, in this, you're actually flying planes and trying to do really special operations. And I think some of the missions you do in that game are actually based off actual events in the Gulf War. Really tight controls. I highly recommend that. And I think it's one of those weird games you can find for like $1 online. So Air Force Delta, I will give a 9 out of 10. It is a great flight game. Almost a flight simulator. Next up, Alien Front Online. Now, this is a weird war game that obviously was based about online multiplayer. You drive tanks and stuff. It's pretty dang cool, but in order to actually play these games online now, you need a broadband adapter, you need to set stuff up, you actually have to hack into it with a Game Shark. Really complicated. It's a fun game, but for the current state that it's in, I'll say it's a 7 out of 10. Next up, we have Alone in the Dark, The New Nightmare. This is a controversial one. I feel like a lot of people don't like this. It's considered one of the worst games in the series, but I really like it. It's really retro survival horror done in a really fun way. A lot of the survival horror on Dreamcast is actually really quite well done, and I think it has good music, cool monsters, and really cool paranormal elements. I'll give that an 8.5 out of 10. Next up, we have Armada. Now, Armada is a plane game, sort of more multiplayer focused. It's sort of like a modern day twin stick shooter. You're flying around in space, and if I remember correctly, it's actually all procedurally generated. You can technically play the game forever. You're flying along through space, fighting all sorts of stuff like giant space octopuses and stuff, and by killing them, you get money that you can take back to Earth, turn it in, and get more cool gear to make it where you fly faster and shoot harder. With friends, it is extremely fun. I put a lot of hours into this, so I definitely got to give that an 8 out of 10. It is really great. Next up, we're going to Armymen, Sarge's Heroes. I know some people like the Armymen series. I never really did. I mean, they're decently designed third-person shooters, but I feel like they're just so uninspired. They're sticking to the toy gimmicks so hard that I feel like it makes them worse. I'll give it a 6.5 out of 10. Next up, Atari Anniversary Edition. Now, this one is kind of interesting because it is a compilation of your classic Atari games, and that's fine, but what makes it cool is it actually has a bunch of rare interviews with a bunch of Atari heads, including Nolan Bushnell. So if you're kind of a gaming historian, like I like to consider myself, check that one out. And again, it's one of those games that costs like 50 cents, so it's really worth getting. I'll give that one a 7.5 out of 10, because I still feel like Atari games aren't super fun to me, but the interviews make it much, much cooler. Next up, we have Bang, a Gunship Elite, which is another one of those shmups, you're flying along blasting stuff. This one almost sort of has a Super Nintendo vibe to me because you view stuff in a really zoomed out way, and I think the level design is really, really cool. This game is really, really expensive. It's still fun. I think it's one of the better games. I do wish that it didn't cost so dang much. I have a copy, and I'll probably never trade it just because it is so freaking expensive. I'll give it a 7.5. It's fun, but I think that there's better games in that genre on this console. Next up, we have Bangai-O. Now, this is a spaceship game. You're flying along. You're just blowing stuff up in space. Both of those are good. Maybe I'm mixing up those two. Both of those are really good, though. Both Bangai-O and Bang Gunship Elite are really good plain shooting games. The difference is one you're in the cockpit and one you're zoomed out. I will give that second one there a 7.5 out of 10. Next up, we have Blue Stinger, one of my favorite games on the system. I actually think it is a really good hidden gem of the Dreamcast. It is a survival horror game that is super, super goofy. It takes place on Christmas, and so while you're trying to fight off all these mutants and stuff, there is actual Christmas music playing. Super funny. Later in the game, you turn into a giant mutant yourself. You fight the last boss with a rocket launcher. Super funny. I give that a 9 out of 10. Next up, we have Bomberman Online. Classic Bomberman with a giant top-down view, blowing up your friends. Pretty dang cool. I actually like the 3D Bombermans quite a bit. I think that they are a little bit weird graphically, but functionality-wise, they do still work well. I'll give that one an 8 out of 10, and if you're playing it with friends, that's definitely an 8.5 or a 9 out of 10 game. Next up, Buggy Heat. We have another nice off-road racer here, and Buggy Heat, pretty cool, not super inspired. It's definitely one of those games that's trying to show off its physics engine more than anything else. You're jumping over hills and having giant fun times, but it's definitely kind of just based on, hey, you guys want to go drive out back? Cool, not the best. I'll give that one a 7 out of 10. Next up is Bust-A-Move 4, classic arcade puzzle action. Pretty dang fun. I own Bust-A-Move 4 on like 10 different consoles at this point. This is fun though. If you like the Bust-A-Move games, they're fine. I'm a big fan of puzzlers, so in general I think it's actually pretty high quality, but a little bit rudimentary. I will give it a 6.5 out of 10. Next up is Buzz Lightyear of Star Command. I don't know why, it seems like a lot of people I talk to who grew up with this game love it a lot more than I did. It is a well-designed licensing game. I mean, a lot of licensed games are kind of basic just because they're selling it by the title alone. This one definitely seems like the developers actually cared. So, you get to shoot lasers, jump around, and be a toy who's alive. I'll give that a 7 out of 10. Next up, Caesar's Palace 2000, gambling game, what do you expect? Not super good. I'll give it a 5 out of 10. Maybe if you're really into cards, it's more. I'm sure somebody out there is going to be like, hey, it's a 10 out of 10. Next up is Cannon Spike, one of the weirdest games on the console in my opinion. Cannon Spike is sort of a 3D beat 'em up. You go along punching stuff. The weird thing though is this is made by Capcom and there are secret characters, and one of the secret characters is Mega Man, and the game is actually kind of hardcore. You go through like a Resident Evil style level where you're blasting all sorts of zombies and stuff, and what's really cool is the levels are randomized. So they're all designed, but they show up in a random order. So each time you play through it, you really don't know if you're going to be fighting the last boss first or what. Really kind of cool. I'm going to give that one a 9 out of 10. I put a lot of time into it. Next up, Capcom versus SNK. These are crazy good fighting games. I never knew why these didn't take off as much as Marvel vs. Capcom. I actually like the graphical style more than Marvel vs. Capcom. The particle effects to punches and specials was really cool to me. I'm going to give that one an 8.5 out of 10, and its follow-up, Capcom vs. SNK 2, which technically didn't come out in America, but I have a copy of it. I'm going to go and tell you, Capcom vs. SNK 2 is a 10 out of 10 game. Extremely fun, extremely good roster. Next up, Carrier. Now, this one is another survival horror game, because there are a bunch of these. I like Carrier a lot, though, because one of the weird things about it is that it has invisible zombies. One sec. Yes, you heard me right. Invisible zombies. One of the big catchphrases of the game is, if you can hear them, you're already dead. So you had to put on these goggles. Basically, you get a gun, you put on the goggles, and when you can see them, you can kill them. However, other than that gimmick, it's not a overall, it's not a super great game. It is fun. It's interesting. And it's unique, but it's not a great game. I will give it a 7 out of 10. If you are super into survival horror games, it's a good one to pick up. If you're just collecting, you don't really need that one. Next up, Centipede. There were a bunch of these games, and I don't know why, but they're arcade games remade in 3D. This is another one of those. I really don't care for those. It just seems like one of those, why did you make this style of games? I'm going to give it a 5.5 out of 10. Next up is next up is Championship Surfer. People ask me what game I hate most on Dreamcast. True story, it's this. I do not know why I hate this game so much, but it annoys the hell out of me. It definitely came out in that era of people trying to knock off Tony Hawk's Pro Skater. It wants to have that style. It's super annoying. It's overly complicated. It is by far one of the games I despise on this system. I'm giving it a 2 out of 10. Next up, we have Charge and Blast. Another cool action game, very shooty and looty. I think it's fun. Not super great. There's definitely a reason it didn't get ported to anything else. I'll give that one a 7 out of 10. Next up, Chicken Run. Another one of those kids games. I kind of like the art style because it's sort of claymation-y, sticking close to the movie. But again, one of those games that's kind of like, why did you make this? Clearly somebody was paying the bills and said, no, we need a Chicken Run video game. And there we got it. Alright, next up, Chu Chu Rocket. Super good, amazing puzzle game, even better with a friend. Yeah, basically the main thing is your space mice or space cats? Yeah, your space cats, and you're trying to avoid them. There's like a giant grid, and there's mice running around, and you drop directional tiles to basically make a river of mice across the board, and whoever can save the most by directing them safely into the, there'll basically be like a goal point, a little part on the board you're trying to get everybody to. It's fun, because you're basically trying to set your own tiles down, and your enemy's trying to set tiles down, and so you're competitively trying to push mice all over the board, and giant space cats come down and eat everything. You just have to play it. Seriously, it's one of those games you need to buy. It is so funny, and it is so good, and you have to play it to believe it. Seriously, I'm giving that one a 10 out of 10, and seriously, no regrets. Alright, next up we have... where's Chu Chu Rocket? Next up we have Coaster Works. It's just one of those roller coaster building games. Pretty cool. It's decently designed. The problem is I played Roller Coaster Tycoon first, so following that up with this was kind of a paltry downgrade. If you haven't played that, or you want a console version of Roller Coaster Tycoon, it's a solid 7 out of 10 game. Next up, Confidential Mission. These were like on-rail shooters that you played with a light gun, actually. But I thought they were interesting because they were designed for console instead of most which were designed for arcade and brought to console. Like, that's what all the Time Crisis games were. Picture James Bond in a Time Crisis game. That's what it is. Super goofy story, really weird character models, and honestly, pretty dang fun. I would give that one a solid 7.5 out of 10. Alright, next up is Conflict Zone, one of the weird RTSs. You actually have a real-time strategy on this console, and it's really bizarrely hard for some reason. It's like an RTS, so you're building units and trying to take over a map. The strangest thing they've put in this game is that there's actually a propaganda rating. You actually have to go in there and film footage of the war zone to make people love you and get more funding. Very odd choice, but I do consider it fun. I'll give that one an 8 out of 10. Next up, Cool Borders Burn. I think, oh wait, the US title is Rippin' Riders. Those are good. It's a snowboardy type game. They're fun. I'm not super big fan of that type of genre, but I think that what they're going for works really, really well. I'll give that one a 7.5 out of 10. Next up, Crazy Taxi! Obviously, we all know these games. We all love these games. They're super incredible. I love them a bunch. I've put a bunch of hours into them. I really like the soundtrack. I'm a big fan of stupid old 90s Offspring. So yeah, I'll give the original Crazy Taxi a 9 out of 10, and Crazy Taxi 2, which is basically the same thing, but with an extra couple characters and a bigger map, a 9.5 out of 10. Both of those. Cannot get enough. Seriously, I wish we'd get more of those, not on cell phones. Next up is D2. D2 is a very surrealist, sort of survival horror game. I consider it more of a horror puzzle game because there is such a heavy element of problem solving. I like this a lot. They censored it in America. I think you can get the original version in Europe and it doesn't have the censored scenes. The big thing is it's basically like these monsters born out of like plant monsters. And they kind of censored it a little bit in the US, but still a very good game. I'll give that one a 7.5 out of 10 because again, there are better survival horror games on this, like the Resident Evils, which we'll get to in a bit. Next up is Dave Mira's Freestyle BMX. This is such a good game. This was the first game I felt like that actually sort of played off the Tony Hawk craze properly. They actually got the look and the feel and the scoring system right. Really, really good games. I do wish that the maps were a little bit bigger. That's my one complaint about this game, is you just kind of bump into the limits of the game sometimes, but still a really, really fun one. I'm going to give that one a 9 out of 10. Let me take another sip. Alright, that's the last of my water. I might be screwed. Alright, here we go. Next up is Daytona USA 2001, or in America I think it was just called Daytona USA. Racing game, very, very focused on, of course, Daytona, which is Indy, or what is that, stock car racing. So that's where you get the classic kind of car you see, race cars that are so built for speed they literally can't back up. They go on a giant lap 500 times. It's that as a video game, and it, for what it does, it's actually pretty dang fun. I put some serious time into them. Going back, I kind of appreciate them more. You can definitely tell it's one of those games where they did a lot of research to make sure it was as accurate as possible, and I say it's a great one. If you have a steering wheel especially, I really like the finesse and the turning, so I'm going to give that one a 9 out of 10. It is a good racing game. Next up is Dead or Alive 2. Dead or Alive 2 is actually really, really interesting because it is a better version than the PlayStation 2 port. This is one of the few Dreamcast games that looked better and had less loading times. Everything was absolutely head and shoulders above on the PS2 version. So yeah, I'm going to give that one. We all know Dead or Alive. It's got great combos. Really, really interesting comboing system in that. Much more about timing, trying to counter people and stuff. Good as hell, solid systems. I'm going to give that one a 9 out of 10. Next up is Death Crimson OX. This is a really weird shooting gun game. I have the box behind me, and sometimes I read it because it's super, super weird. It's like this lady whose job is to slay evil demons, and it's just super bizarre. It's another on-rail shooter, but just imagine somebody tried to combine Castlevania with an on-rail shooter, and it is that freaking insane. I can't really say if it's good or not. It's pretty dang out there. I'll give it a 7 out of 10 because, honestly, it gets points just for being so freaking mind-boggling. Next up, we got Deep Fighter. This one's a nice, cool in-space game. Another one of those sort of a flight simulator in outer space. Pretty dang fun. I believe they turned it into a series. Maybe I'm mistaken. I think that they did sequels to it that had different names, but it all started back there. And yeah, it's pretty all right. I didn't really care for it overall, but something about just floating around in space is never super my cup of tea. But I'm still going to give it an 8 out of 10 because I recognize how good it is. Next up, we have Demolition Racer No Exit. Guess what that's about? If you said crashing cars together, you're exactly right. It is that. It's pretty good. I actually like the physics of it. So much of the gameplay style actually reminds me of Daytona USA. It's kind of got the Daytona USA vibe to it, except with, obviously, a ton more destruction. You get to go bam, 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 bam. Pretty dang fun. I'm going to give it a 7.5 out of 10. Next up, we have Dino Crisis. This is the way to play Dino Crisis. I know it's on other systems. I love it on the Dreamcast. I think if you get the HDMI cable mod, you can actually play it in freaking HD, and it looks freaking amazing. So highly, highly, highly recommend that. Super great. It's basically Resident Evil with dinosaurs. It has so many great lines, like walking up to somebody who's been cut in half, and she touches their neck and goes, "He's dead." Yeah, of course, he doesn't have legs. Of course he's dead. I'm going to give that one a 10 out of 10. Those games got problems, but I don't care. They're super freaking funny. They're super great. And I like that they actually have more complicated, like, problem solving than your typical Resident Evil or your typical survival horror. Next up is Disney's Dinosaur, another one of those little kid games that I didn't really care for. They're alright. I mean, if for some reason you got a kid who really wants to play a video game and you've only got a Dreamcast, park them in front of that. It's a nice 6 out of 10 experience. Alright, next up we have Donald Duck Quack Attack, or Donald Duck Going Quackers. Again, one of those weird kids games. It's solid. I've actually heard some people defend this game and say that it is one of the best young adult games ever made. I was a little bit too old. I mean, the Dreamcast, when I was actually collecting for the Dreamcast, I was like in high school. So maybe if I was about 5 years younger, I would have loved that. But seriously, I'm going to give that one a 7.5 out of 10 because it is spoken of so highly. Next up, we got Dragon Riders Chronicles of Bern. I really like these. It's an action game. Very actiony, medieval fantasy type of hack and slash. But it's good. It's really good. It's really rare, and I don't think it should be. I've beaten it once, and it's fine. I kind of feel like I should probably go back through it, because I feel like I didn't really fully appreciate all the different aspects of the levels and monsters. But yeah, it's cool. I'll give that one a solid 8 out of 10. Next up is Draconis, Cult of the Worm. Another sort of dragon-y type game. Same sort of thing, different studio. I like it though. They're both really, really cool games. I don't think they're the best. I kind of like the Berserk game a little bit more, so I'm going to give that one a 7.5 out of 10. Alright, next up we got Ducati World, which, of course, is another really good racing game. I'm not really into Ducatis, or I feel like I like modern racing games a lot. Retro racers I'm not as much into, but this one really, really grabbed my attention and I liked it. I'm going to give that one actually an 8.5 out of 10. Next up we got Dynamite Cop, which is called Dynamite Deku 2 in Japan. Another one of those great on-rail shooters. This one's pretty fun, though. Of course, it's got a law enforcement twist to it, but it's super fun. I mean, it's great. I think that this was actually secretly ported from the Sega Saturn, wasn't it? one of the games was, it's great though. I mean, I think it's fine. I like on-rail shooters a lot. Not as much as I used to, but I still think they're really fun and goofy. This one especially. Lots of like, don't shoot me, don't shoot me. People running in front of your guns and stuff. I'm going to give that one a 9 out of 10. All right. Next up, we got Ecco the Dolphin, Defender of the Future. This is one of the biggest games ever made. It's like 200 levels. You're swimming around. When it originally came out, people called it an ocean simulator. It was just so freaking accurate to marine biology. It's fun. I like it. It's definitely odd, but I like it a bunch. And I feel like it's still such a great display of just the raw power of the Dreamcast the Dreamcast console. I almost said the Dreamcast guy console. But yeah, that one's a good one. I'm going to give that one a 9 out of 10. Next up, we got ECW Anarchy Rules and ECW Hardcore Revolution. Both of these very much the same style. I believe they're probably made at the same time, at the same studio. Both of them are really solid wrestling games. But since I'm not super into wrestling, I've always heard that the main thing that defines those is the roster. I don't know if they got good wrestlers or bad wrestlers just because I don't know who the fan favorites are. For the mechanics, though, they clearly operate very, very well. So I'm going to give them 8 out of 10 to both of those. All right, next up we got Elemental Gimmick Gear, or EGG for short. This game is odd. It's got like pre-rendered backgrounds. It almost looks like a crazy PlayStation 1 game on crack. I like it. It's all about this big robot. Super odd, though. I really like the fact that, if I remember correctly, the pre-rendered backgrounds were actually paintings. So you're basically walking around in paintings for the entire game. I like it a lot. It's very hard to find, and I don't think it should be. I'm going to give that one a 7.5 out of 10, because it's nice, but it's not my favorite. All right, next up we have Industrial Spy Operation Espionage. This is, again, another one of those silly on-rail shooters that is super funny. I like them a bunch. This one, not as good as the others, though. I'm going to give it a 6.5 out of 10. If you're heavily into the genre, pick it up. If you skip it, you're really not missing anything. Next up is ESPN International Track and Field, which is, well, just a big track and field game. Lots of Olympic-style games. You know, what do you want? I give that one a nice 6 out of 10. Next up, ESPN NBA 2 Night. That's a basketball game. I don't know anything about basketball. If I'm playing basketball, I'm having fun. If I'm watching basketball, I'm bored. I'm going to give that one a 7 out of 10 because I like the physics of it. Next up, we have Evil Dead, Hail to the King. The Evil Dead movies are very, very popular. The games, much less so. Each of the games, I think I own all 3 of them, are kind of quirky. This one especially. This game had some really bad design flaws. Like, some of the bosses were basically invincible if you didn't have chainsaw fuel, and your chainsaw hand would run out of gas extremely quickly. Lots of problems with it. I actually had to look up a strategy guide to even beat it, just because I could not figure out how to get past some of the areas. Still, I have to compliment them for actually trying to make an Evil Dead game so early on, so I'm going to give it a 7.5 out of 10. Next up, we got Evolution and Evolution 2, which it doesn't say the subheader there, but the subheader is Far Off Promise. Both of the Evolution games are very, very cool. They're strategy, I mean, you call them strategy RPGs, basically. You're, like, moving around on a grid. Picture Final Fantasy Tactics, but a lot more cartoony. I like it a lot. Big fan of the Evolution games. Super weird. I do wish that they had a little bit more adult writing. They get a little bit, like, little kiddish at times, and I don't really care for that. I don't like whenever my characters start being like, friendship is the power to defeat evil. It's kind of like, ugh, get out a gun. Guns are the power. No, don't quote me on that. Both of those, though, I'd actually give a solid 8.5 out of 10. Next up, we got Expendable. Those are fun. The Expendable games are, you're basically a soldier who, of course, is expendable. They're top-down shooters where you just run along blasting everything on the map. super goofy. I actually like him just because I really like twin-stick shooters, and in this case it's technically not a twin-stick shooter since there's only one joystick on the Dreamcast, but they sort of do the same thing with the face buttons. I like it. I can't say that it's a great game, but I like it. I'm going to give that one a 6.5 out of 10. Next up, we're going with... not Evil Twin, Evil Evolution. Next up... F1 World Grand Prix and F1 World Grand Prix 2. Both of these are, of course, giant racing games where you're driving around in F1 racers, Formula 1 race cars, the fastest vehicles in the world. Those vehicles actually go so fast their tires melt while they're on the track, and that's how they're able to stick on the road while making those crazy turns. I don't know why I know that, but they're good racing games. They're fine. I don't know. They're definitely more for people who are big fans of Formula 1, and since I'm not a giant fan of, like, professional racing, not exactly my deal. But they're definitely cool, so I'm going to give both of those a solid 7 out of 10. Next up, we got F355 Challenge, which is another racing game, and, yeah, more of the racing games, and that one's another solid 7 out of 10. Next up we have Fatal Fury Mark of the Wolves, which is a hardcore, super hardcore fighting game. I mean, it's made for people who are brutally tough. There's lots of crazy, really intricate chain attack combos. You gotta be really good. It's obviously, I think that's one of the first games of the Fatal Fury series, which later on got rolled into King of Fighters. But yeah, that one is super, super, super cool. Took me a long time to find it. Really glad I did, though. Very, very fun. Sort of reminds me of King of Fighters. Obviously, I think that same studio. I'm not sure if it's the same team. That one I'm going to give a 9 out of 10. I'm like slouching a little bit from exhaustion already. Next up, we have Fighting Force 2. Now, here's a controversial opinion. I love Fighting Force 2. A lot of people seem to hate on that game and think that it sucks. I don't know why. I think it's great. Obviously, it's completely different from Fighting Force 1, and there's no co-op like Fighting Force 1 had, but I don't know, having a really weird third-person shooter in the future is great. I can acknowledge that a lot of the aiming and shooting is a little bit messed up. Still, I had a blast with it. I'm going to definitely give it my seal of approval and give it a solid 8.5 out of 10. If you are looking for a reason to kick people in the face and break into a prison, it's funny. And of course it all takes place in the future, so one talks funny. Alright, next up we have Fish Eyes, or sorry, Real Fishing Wild is what we called it in America. Real Fishing. This is seriously, people laugh if you haven't played it. One of the best games on the Dreamcast. It's actually a really solid fishing game. You can drive around the boat. You can be goofy. It's fun. And there's actually a Dreamcast fishing rod that you could buy just to play this game. So I'm actually going to give that one a solid 8.5 out of 10. Next up, we have Flag to Flag, which is another one of those racing games. It's pretty fun. I don't know. This game is super basic. I actually didn't care as much for Flag to Flag. It kind of seemed like a studio on a deadline. I'm going to give that one a 6 out of 10. Next up is where is it? Freestyle Scooter. Razor Freestyle Scooter. Sorry, a lot of the names out here are written in the European title and then English title afterward. Razor Freestyle Scooter was once again another one of those horrible ripoffs trying to cash in on the Tony Hawk craze in the worst way possible. This game sucks. It sucks bad. I'm giving it a 4 out of 10, and if you can actually play it, I tip my hat to you, because that game blows. 4 out of 10. Alright, next up we're looking at Freestyle. Next up, Frogger. Frogger 2 Swampy's Revenge. This is again one of those weird games that's trying to be a sequel to an old arcade game. I don't really care for it. It's sort of trying to have a story and stuff. It sort of feels like they're trying to cram in a plot to a game that was fun because it never had a plot. I can respect it for what it's trying to be. I give that one a 6 out of 10. Alright, next up is Fur Fighters. This is a third-person shooter about cute, cuddly animals blowing the hell out of each other. You can actually get a sniper rifle and shoot teddy bears' heads off. Super weird. It took me a long time to find. There's actually 2 versions of it. There's a rare version you buy that actually has a holographic case. That's the one I got. It's fine. It's not ultra great, but if you're a collector, obviously you're going to need to get this one. I'm actually going to give it a 7 out of 10. Alright, next up we got Gauntlet Legends. Yes, I love this game. Anything multiplayer on the Dreamcast is extra good, and that one is a big contender of one of the best multiplayer games on the entire system. You go around fighting evil, slaying dragons, having fun with your friends. You play as jesters and barbarians and archers. You grab food off the ground to heal yourself. Classic weird-ass fun. I'm going to give that one a 9.5 out of 10. Alright, next up we got Giga Wing and Giga Wing 2. I'm doing both these at the same time again because these are both, again, sort of shmups. They're plane shooting games where you're flying along, getting in trouble, shooting stuff. Very good though. I really think that they are well designed. I like Giga Wing and Giga Wing 2 because the controlling mechanics are very different. It's good. It's really good. I think I beat both of them. I haven't rebeaten them. They're actually pretty dang hard. I'm going to give both of those a 7.5 out of 10. My body is starting to hurt here. I'm sorry if I'm slouching some. I'm sitting on a hard floor, and honestly, I just got done editing for literally like 10 hours straight. It's the middle of the night, and I ran out of water. Oh, I have another bottle of water. Okay, now we're continuing on this. Next up is Grand Theft Auto 2. Grand Theft Auto 2 on the Dreamcast is super cool. It is the original top-down Grand Theft Auto that I feel like everybody forgets about. Yes, that game started out 2D and actually pretty stupendous. I'll defend that till I die. I grew up playing that version and I still love every minute of it. It's goofy, I like the factions. I'm going to give that one a 9 out of 10 just because I like the radio and the music so much. Alright, next up we got Grandia 2. One of my very favorite games on the entire console. Right up front, I'm giving Grandia 2 a 10 out of 10. I love the music. Absolutely think it's hilarious that it has all those guitar riffs, and it has my favorite RPG combat system of any game ever. It is so cool. You can actually hit people to delay their attacks. Crazy, super intricate. Whoever came up with that, man, you're a freaking genius. At one point you go to the moon. Love it. I love every single thing about that. Alright, next up we got The Grinch. Again, another one of those kid games. Sort of cartoony. I think it came out before the Jim Carrey movie. It's fine though. I mean, if you're a little kid and you happen to be a Dreamcast collector at the same time, well, congratulations. They got a game for you. Okay, moving on to Gunbird 2. If I remember correctly, this is actually a helicopter game. You're flying along, and one of the cool things was it had this targeting system where you could actually, like, basically hold your spot by holding a trigger and then cycle around it. And maybe we could, like, lock onto a target and then strafe. It's a top-down game, so because of it, you're kind of seeing everything as a 2D surface and then hovering around. Pretty cool. I like that it actually felt different than a lot of the other plane-style shooters on the system, so I'm actually going to give that one an 8 out of 10. Now, next up we got Gundam Side Story 0079. I really like this game, and so a lot of questions people get is, do you need to know the anime to like the Gundam game? This one you don't. I played it. I absolutely loved it. It is a first-person shooter mech game, basically. You're going along, you're getting into trouble, and it's actually really cool. I like a lot of the missions and stuff. I don't know anything about the show, so I don't know how much it connects to it, but as a game, it stands alone freaking marvelously. I'm actually going to give that one an 8.5 out of 10. Alright, next up we have Heavy Metal Geomatrix. This is an odd one. There are a couple games on this console that are just super bizarre. This is one of them. Heavy Metal Geomatrix is a robot game, right? Yeah, it's weird. I mean, it's one of those things, you kind of need to look up gameplay of it, because me explaining how it all works doesn't really do it justice. I didn't really care for this one that much. It's good-ish. I'm gonna give it a 7 out of 10. Next up, we have Hidden and Dangerous. This is all about top secret spec ops agents. It's alright. The military games from this era were super weird because they tread the line from trying to be super arcadey and super serious, and I feel like this one leaned a little bit more towards serious, and it doesn't work. I'm going to give that one a 6 out of 10. Next up, we have The House of the Dead 2. Love this game, absolutely. There's a lot of gun shooters on the console, obviously. Kind of what made it famous in its small period on the market. This one cracks me up. Absolutely love it. I buy it. I played it a billion times with a bunch of my friends. I actually cheat on it. Sometimes what I'll do is I'll get a turbo controller and make... I have a turbo controller where I can reprogram the buttons. So I make the shoot button and the reload button the same button, and then I just hold it down with turbo. So I'm literally just like shooting people and reloading it just as fast, shooting 1,000,000 bullets a second. Goofy, good fun. Next up we have... Hoyle, I always forget how to pronounce this, Hoyle Casino. It's another gambling game. They're fine. I don't know, I never play these type of things because I'm just not a gambling person. I'm going to give that a 6 out of 10. Next up is Hydro Thunder. I love Hydro Thunder a lot. I tried to set a world record in it at one point when I was really obsessed with world records. But man, the people who set the world records, they glitch through the tracks in ways I can't. It is a boat racing game, but you're jet boats. Super fun. Absolutely love the tracks a bunch. They're super ridiculous. You're like driving through flooded Los Angeles and it's collapsing. Great game. Giving that one a 9 out of 10. Alright, next up we have Illbleed. Illbleed is probably the game people ask about the most. Somebody actually had me autograph a copy of Illbleed once. I'm not even joking. That was one of the first times anybody asked me for an autograph. Illbleed is hilarious. It is basically a haunted house simulator is how I would call it, because it's basically a series of horror movie attractions, but instead of being fake, they're real monsters that have set up in this town. And if you can survive going through these 5 haunted houses, sort of, well, then you get $1 million. And basically, at the bottom of each one of them, one of your friends has been captured. So by beating each one of them, you rescue your friends, and you all live happily ever after as rich people. But the more people that die, the less you get paid. Very odd. I do recommend it, though. I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10. Next up, we have Incoming! Incoming is just another one of those shooter games. It's alright, though. I like it. It sort of reminds me of Missile Command a little bit, but it's fine. I like that one. I'm going to give that one a 7 out of 10. Iron Aces, which I believe is another one of those plane games, but more on the side of like Ace Combat. Lots more about like flying around and you're the best pilot in the entire military. Well, it's alright. I like it a lot. It's fun. It makes me wish that we got a flight stick on the system, though. So I am going to give that one a 7.5 out of 10. Next up is Jeremy McGrath Supercross 2000. It's a moto type game. It's a dirt bike racing game that's pretty cool. I like some stuff about it. Like I like the mud physics and stuff. It's a goofy game. If I was more into that style of racing, I really do like racing games a lot, but I like the more modern stuff where you can customize different details of your vehicle. This is really primitive. For what it is, though, it's pretty fun. I'll actually give that an 8 out of 10 because I do really respect what they've built with it. Next up we have we have Jet Set Radio. I've gone on record to say I'm the only person in the world who doesn't really care for Jet Set Radio, but I acknowledge that it is an amazing game. It's got really good soundtrack. It's got really funny character design. The story actually exists. The fact that you're like this guy trying to save Tokyo or Neo Tokyo, super cool. I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10, despite the fact that I myself don't really care for it. I know that I am wrong and the game is right. Next up we got JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, which it's a fighting game and an odd one. I never really watched JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. I know it's huge now in America. It's fine. It's a cool fighting game. Since I don't know the characters, I feel like I'm not getting a lot out of it. I don't really watch much anime, so I feel like I'm not getting the full enjoyment of how weird that game is. But I'm still going to give it a 7.5 out of 10. Next up we have Cal the Kangaroo, another one of those kids games. Kids games that I don't really care for. I'm going to give that one a 6 out of 10 because you're running around as a kangaroo. Congratulations. Welcome to Kangaroo Town. Next up we got the King of Fighters 99. This is super good. So there are actually there's 5 total King of Fighter games on the Dreamcast. There's only 2 that are in America. King of Fighters 99 Evolution and Dream Match 99. Dream Match 99 is the rare one, but they're both super good. They are some of the best retro SNK games ever. They're so good. I love Iori. I love Terry. I'm really big fan of all those characters. I love the comboing system in that so much. It has a way of making it where juggling is very difficult. So being a good player in that game actually feels like an achievement. If you get good at it, you're a champion of fighting games. I'm going to give that one, both of those actually, a 9 out of 10. Moving along past King of Fighters, we got Kiss Psycho Circus, based on the famous band Kiss, the heavy metal rockers that kind of were controversial in the 70s and 80s, but now they're just kind of old dudes. This game is seriously a first-person hack-and-slash game. You're actually going around in a mythological universe, I think, where it's the Kiss guys are actually superheroes, basically, or like gods. It's just like a first-person action game where you swing around swords and chop up monsters. I think it kind of sucks. I'm going to give it a 6 out of 10. Next up, we got The Last Blade. Super cool, sort of a choppy hack-and-slash game. I still haven't put that much time into it. It's decent. What I played is decent. Not really my cup of tea. I'm going to give that one a 7 out of 10. Next up, Legacy of Kain Soul Reaver. I've talked about this in a couple of videos because I think the original Legacy of Kain is super interesting. It's sort of open world. I guess open world isn't the big... It has giant levels, though. That's why it feels open world. The big thing is you're basically playing as a ghost vampire who can phase back and forth between different planes of existence, the ethereal realm and the mortal realm. And depending on where you are, you have different like rules of the world. Like when you're in the world of the dead, water is as thin as air. You can literally walk around underwater, whereas on the mainland, you can do stuff like fly and climb and move objects around. I like it a lot. Combat's cool, story's cool, and the villain is a total badass. So I'm actually going to give that one a 9 out of 10. Next up, we got Last Blade, Legacy of Kain, Le Mans 24 Hours, or Test Drive Le Mans in America. It's another racing game. This one's, again, one of the more serious ones. Super hardcore. I like it a lot, though. It's pretty cool. I'm going to give that one a 7.5 out of 10. It's just a Le Mans game. I mean, Test Drive Le Mans is... it's sort of a Test Drive spin-off. I like the mainline Test Drives more, but that's a good one. Next up, we have Looney Tunes Space Race. It is a kids racing game. There's like 4 of these on the console. This one is probably one of the better designed ones. Obviously, well, we'll get to the others, but it's cool. It's cool. It's got Looney Tunes characters. Definitely during that era where everybody was trying to rip off Mario Kart, it feels like a Mario Kart. I'm going to give that one a 7 out of 10. Next up, we got Mag Force Racing, much more of a cartoonish, silly, over-the-top kind of game. Mag Force Racing is cool, though. It sort of reminds me of Hot Wheels, of having like little race cars jumping around on big tracks and stuff. I give that one a 6 out of 10, because I do think that it's one of the lesser good ones on the console. Mach-N X. This is definitely one of the most bizarre things on the console. Mach-N X is a first-person sword fighting game, but you play as the sword. You're like a sword that has the ability to take over the minds of people, and you'll basically change form depending on whose mind you're taking over. So some people have a tiny knife, some people have a giant katana, some people have like a dagger that shoots stuff out the tip. It's cool though. I actually think that I think it's one of the most underrated games on the system, just because it's a freaking first-person sword fighting game. You can flip over people and stuff. I still think that it's probably got a lot of problems. I've played it as an adult, and I still like it. I feel like the average person, though, is going to go, what the fuck? Still, I'm giving it an 8 out of 10 and saying that it's a must-buy. I'm losing my voice a little bit here, talking for an hour straight. Next up, Mars Matrix. This is one of the most expensive games on the system. It is another shmup, and one that is pretty brilliantly designed. You're flying along, blasting stuff, trying not to get hit. Classic shmup, but just with really cool boss design and stuff. It goes for about $150 though, so I don't know if it's worth that much, but it's cool. If you can find it for about $50, definitely grab it. I'm going to give that one a 9 out of 10. Next up is Marvel vs. Capcom, which is fantastic. It's amazing. We all know what Marvel vs. Capcom is. It's a fighting game that basically created a generation of people who love fighting games, myself included. I'm going to give that one an 8.5 out of 10, and I'm giving the sequel, Marvel vs. Capcom 2, a 10 out of 10, because Marvel vs. Capcom 2 has freaking, 64 characters or 52 characters, tons of people, crazy unlockables, all sorts of variation costumes, great stages that have so much cool art to them, and silly little hidden gems like the fact that the clock on the giant tower in the background actually keeps time correctly. Just so much stuff about that. Spider-Man can beat the hell out of Thanos. So yeah, what more do you need? Definitely suggest that one. Matt Hoffman's Pro BMX. Didn't I do it? No, I did Matt Hoffman's. Right? What was the other one? Dave Mira. Yeah, another Pro BMX game. Bikes. Bikes are great. I think both these are fantastic. I'm going to give that one an 8.5 out of 10. It's bikes. Max Steel is a weird action game. I did not grow up with this cartoon. It was after my generation. They really pushed it hard. It's alright. I don't really... It's just an action-y type game. You're going along shooting people and being a little kid hero. I'm going to give that one a 6.5 out of 10. Next up is Maximum Pool. It's a pool game, but it's good. I like the physics. Something the Dreamcast did exceptionally well is that it actually had a really good physics engine into it. Like, you could program some really, really good objects bumping into each other and stuff, which sounds so basic now, but was a really, really massive deal at the time. So I actually like Maximum Pool. It's great. I'm kind of a pool guy, so yeah, I'm actually going to give that one an 8 out of 10. Next up, we got MDK2, which stands for Murder, Death, Kill. This game is great. You play as several different characters, like levels where you play as Max the dog. He's a dog with 6 arms who can hold 6 different guns at once. The main guy, who's the guy in the suit. It's like basically a suit that makes him bulletproof and be able to fly, and he has like a sniper rifle. Those are like the main third-person shooter levels. There's levels where you're a scientist and you have to solve different puzzles, like combining a nuclear toaster with bread to shoot out nuclear toast. I like that game a lot. I never read the comics, but it's a good game. I'm going to give that one a 9 out of 10. Metropolis Street Racer, really good racing game. I think that they ended up porting these to Xbox, didn't they? I like it a lot. I like street racing games are extra fun to me because they seem sort of relatable. There's a lot of street racing in Dallas, so I've kind of grown up around it. So having a game based on it was actually super exciting to me as a kid, and even as an adult, I actually really like a lot of the mechanics to it. Yeah, Metropolis Street Racing, I'm actually going to give that a 9 out of 10. Next up, we got Midway's Greatest Arcade Hits Volume 1 and Volume 2. Both of these are fine. I'm just not the super old arcade stuff is kind of meh. But they're fine. If you're kind of a retro arcade guy, I think both of these are like solid 7 out of 10 games. Next up, we got Monaco Grand Prix, or yeah, what is it known in America? It's also called Grand Prix Racing Simulation. They're fine. It's more racing games. And again, I think these ones are much more based on the simulation side. Lots more about long races on dark tracks and ultra-serious upgrades to be the best. It's cool, though. I kind of like it. I definitely prefer having my Dreamcast steering wheel and pedals for that. Because if I'm going to be sitting there for hours and hours and hours looking at the track, I want to treat it as serious as the game is treating it. I'm going to give that one an 8 out of 10. Next up is Mortal Kombat Gold. Fun fact, some of the copies of Mortal Kombat Gold break Dreamcasts. I'm pretty sure they're all out of circulation now, but that was like a big deal back in the day. I like Mortal Kombat Gold. A lot of people don't. I think a lot of people thought it was a big downgrade from Mortal Kombat 3. I love it. I thought it had a big roster and cool stuff, and of course, great fatalities. And of course, on the Dreamcast, I can see all that in HD for the first time. So I was thrilled by it. I still play it, and I still love to beat Kano and beat the hell out of everybody. So I'm going to give that one a 7.5 out of 10, because I realized that there are definitely a lot better Mortal Kombat games than it. Mr. Driller. I love Mr. Driller. I never played it back when it was in arcades, but I really like it as a console game. It is a puzzler where you're actually trying to dig as deep as you can, but the big twist is basically breaking blocks lets you go down, and there will be different like pieces that are shaped stuff, sort of like Tetris pieces, and by breaking them, you go deeper and deeper and deeper, but the main twist is you actually have to worry about stuff like getting air. There'll be like air pockets you have to get to refill your oxygen tanks. It's very much a classic game that was made to eat your quarters. I've never beaten it. I had to look up a video of somebody beating it, and the people who do beat it are crazy good, but it's not really about beating it. It's like Donkey Kong. You don't really have to beat Donkey Kong, the old Donkey Kong arcade. It's about playing it. Next up we have Miss Pac-Man Maze Madness, which is another one of those weird sequel games of trying to extrapolate on the concepts that were built in an original game. I don't know. I don't really care for it. It's just so odd. I don't really understand the stuff like Frogger's Revenge and stuff. The sequel arcade games, a bad thing in my opinion. They don't really work. This is definitely another one of those that I get it, but I don't get it. I'm going to give that one a 6 out of 10. Next up we have MTV Sports Skateboarding. This is another one of those people trying to cash in on that Tony Hawk craze. And while I think that they did it pretty well, it could have been a lot better. I just didn't like the scoring system in general. The soundtrack is pretty good, but the soundtrack in Tony Hawk is even better. The problem is I like the punk rock sound of Tony Hawk. I like the level design more of Tony Hawk. It's one of those things where Tony Hawk does everything one notch better. So I'm going to give this a 7 out of 10. Next up we have the Namco Museum, which is, again, another compilation of classic Namco stuff. So if you're really into retro gaming and you have a console like the Dreamcast, which is semi-retro, this is just another way to kind of segue even deeper into retro gaming. I'm not a giant fan of it, but hey, if that's your cup of tea, that is a great one to pick up. I'm going to give that one an 8 out of 10 because I heard that some of the games on there are actual, like, true classics people are obsessed with. Next up, we have a bunch of sports games, and I'm actually just going to blow through all of them. They're all basketball games. My nose is itching, I apologize. We got NBA 2K, 2K1, 2K2, NBA Hoops, NBA Showtime, and NCAA College Football. Okay, so that last one's a football one. I don't know anything about sports. I'll be honest, I'm such a nerd. I grew up loving my controllers more than loving any sort of sport at all. Obviously, you see, I got these little twig arms. I'm not exactly out there tackling people in football. I've heard that they're great, though. People who love those say that all the sports stuff is actually 10 out of 10 on Dreamcast. I don't want to give those a rating, but I'm going to because I promised I would. I'm going to give them all 9 out of 10. We also have NFL 2K1, 2K2, NFL Blitz 2000, NFL Blitz 2001, NFL Quarterback Club 2000, NFL Quarterback Club 2001, NHL 2K, NHL 2K2. All of those are basketball, football, and hockey. And you know what? I don't know anything about any of those sports. And my best friend Nick, who's obsessed with hockey, plays it like every weekend. He'd beat me up if he found out I don't know anything about hockey, but I just don't. But I'm going to give all those 8 out of 10s just so that nobody beats me up in hockey. There was one game I had to skip right there, which is the next Tetris. That's really good. I really like that. It's same old Tetris that you know, but lots of little changes, like different maps, different types of puzzle mode, and I think they actually had one where you could play a puzzle sphere instead. I like it. It had online play back in the day. I don't think anybody's on the servers anymore. Next up, we got Nightmare Creatures 2. Nightmare Creatures 2 is really bizarre. It is It's like I want to say it's sort of like a beat 'em up, sort of like a hack and slash. You walk around as different monsters, fighting stuff, punching them to pieces. It's great. I think that it's been ported to everything. This is one of those games that does kind of irk me because it looks like it was originally on Nintendo 64 and they brought it over to the Dreamcast. It's not a super fantastic addition. So while I do like it, I wish that they had done more with this edition of it. Still, I can love what it is. I'm going to give it an 8.5 out of 10. Next up, we have Omicron the Nomad Soul. Omicron the Nomad Soul is super bizarre. I apologize about scratching my nose. It is a game that is about literally this guy basically realizes he's about to die and talks to you through your Dreamcast to take over his body and bang his wife. I'm not joking, that's actually in the game. So you go along banging his wife and trying to solve his murder, and the weird thing is each time you die in the game, the first person to touch your body is who you jump into the body of. So you become like a stripper at one point, and you're a cop, and then you go along and you're like a freedom fighter. It's cool though. I like it. The whole soundtrack was done by David Bowie. It's actually the first game done by David Cage. I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10. Okay, next up we have Ooga Booga, which, as you can guess by that title, has you playing as a caveman. It's kind of cutesy. There are a couple of these cutesy games on here, like Pin Pin Triathlon, that are just a little bit too much for me. This is definitely a game that I wouldn't even look up a Let's Play of. Like, myself, I would not. But it's alright. I'm going to give that one a 6.5 out of 10. Next up we have Outrigger, another big old shooty game. I like Outrigger a lot. It's goofy. Outrigger's the one, right? Yeah, it's the plane. I can't remember if it's the plane shooting game. There's so many. Obviously, I'm trying to remember 247 games out of my memory. Outrigger, I think, is another shooter, but I can't remember if it's over the rail on rails. All right, I'll be honest. I don't remember that one very well, so I'm gonna guess it's a 7 out of 10. And if I'm wrong, I'm sure you guys will rip me apart in the comments. He does remember every Dreamcast game perfectly from memory. Okay. Next up is Pin Pin Triathlon, and I literally was just talking about that. Pin Pin Triathlon is super quirky, super weird. It is, you're playing as like penguins running around. It's bizarre. I don't really get it. It's one of those games that I played for about 45 minutes and went, okay, that's a part of my collection now. Not my cup of tea. But yeah, if you're really wanting a super cutesy action game, guess what? There is one, and it's Pin Pin Triathlon. I'm going to give that a 7 out of 10. Next up, we got one of the best, probably two of the best Dreamcast games of all time. We got Phantasy Star Online and Phantasy Star Online version 2. A question I see a lot, excuse me for that burp, a question I see a lot for people who don't play Dreamcast is, what is version 2? It was basically an update that released a year later that includes a bunch of extra content. Technically, if you have version 2, you have version 1 as well. It's just the same game with more. I like them a lot, though. Lots of missions, lots of cool stuff. People actually still maintain the servers to this day, so if you want to play it online, you can. Super good. Lots of different classes. You can be a shooter, you can be a hack and slash. In my playthrough, I basically made Cloud Strife. Great, it's a fun as hell game. If you're looking for a freaking game that's basically an online super early version of MMOs as they'd become later, it's that, 100%. Even by yourself, it's awesome. Definitely highly recommend it. I actually gonna give them both a 10 out of 10. Alright, next up we have Plasma Sword. A weird fighting game. It's alright. Plasma Sword is one of those games that's... Alright, yeah, Plasma Sword, yeah, fighting game. It's cool. It definitely leaves something to be desired. They took some of the guys from Plasma Sword and actually brought them over to Marvel's Capcom. I like them more in that. I'm going to give it a 7.5 out of 10. Next up we have Pod Speed Zone, another weird racer, but a cool one. I kind of like it. Much more, it has a slightly futuristic element to it. It's cool. The problem is, there are so many of these racing games that are trying to be different versions of the same thing, I feel like. It's just like, look at us with a sleek future of beautiful, perfect racing. Some of them hit it, this one doesn't quite. I'm going to give it a 6.5. Next up we have Power Stone 1 and 2. Welcome to a Power Stone world. These games are amazing. I'm going to give both of them 10 out of 10 because I just think that they're so fun and so quirky. I like that the characters are also, off the wall. I mean, there's a freaking mummy with chainsaws for hands. There's a Native American guy who turns into a huge robot. There's a gunslinger who turns into a cyborg and shoots missiles out of his nipples. Both of them are fantastic. I like that the levels evolve as you play on them. Next up, we're going to do Prince of Persia Nights. What is it? Prince of Persia Arabian Nights. This, I think, was the last side-scrolling Prince of Persia game, because a lot of people forget they started as side-scrollers. I think this game kind of sucks. I'd give it a 6 out of 10. My problem is that it seems like they rushed it. It seems like they just had to throw a game out there, and that's all they could come up with. And, yeah, it shows. Next up is Project Justice Rival Schools 2. This is seriously one of the best fighting games I've ever played in my life. It is a huge roster. Each of the different characters is basically a different student, and their abilities in the arena are based on whatever their talents are in class. So if you're like the kid who's good on swim team, you swim through the air and hit people. If you're part of the kendo team, you have a kendo stick. If you're the school bully, you got a switchblade. If you play as the weird kids from the psychic school, I'm not joking, they actually shoot telekinesis. Super good. Love that game. I'm giving it a 10 out of 10. Absolutely love it. Next up is Psychic Force 2012, which at the time was the distant future. I like that game too. Super weird. You basically are a bunch of people fighting in these. You're floating, and it's a 2D fighter, so you're actually floating around punching each other. And you can reduce somebody's health to 0, but the easier way to win a match is to knock them outside the arena. Everybody fights in basically a big psychic box. Yes, I'm serious. And by knocking them out of the psychic box, you immediately win. I like it. Has a lot of potential. Not super fun. I feel like it's one of those games that I like to show to people to show how weird the Dreamcast is, even though that game's not one of the best of the best. So I'm actually going to give it a 7.5 out of 10. Next up, I really do apologize for scratching my nose. This spotlight right in my face makes my nose dry out. Next up, we have Q*bert. Another one of those weird times where they're like, hey, let's take a super old school game that was only in the arcade and make it 3D for no reason. I don't really care for Q*bert, but I don't really care for the original arcade Q*bert either. It just was never really my cup of tea, which I keep saying because it's the middle of the night. I've been up for 15 hours, but I can see why people love it. It's one of those things where I think that other people would think that this is the pinnacle of Q*bert gameplay. So I'm actually going to give it an 8 out of 10 and say, not for me, but it's definitely for someone. Next up, Quake 3 Arena, a 10 out of 10 freaking shooter. This game is so cool, ultra fast. The game that literally invented the rocket jump, even playing it offline now, is an absolute thrill ride. I love playing as the dude who's on the hoverboard and scooting along and blowing up everybody I can. I like the voiceover so much, where every time you pick up a power, there's a voice that's like, quad damage. Super fun. Definitely 10 out of 10 shooter. Next up we have Railroad Tycoon 2. Very odd tycoon game. You're actually running a railroad business by constructing tracks and setting up stations and calculating taxes. Yeah, that's a freaking game. It's alright. I don't know if you can play with mouse and keyboard, but if you can, you should. Doing the construction parts with a controller sucks. So I'm actually going to give that one a 7 out of 10. And a 7.5 if you have a keyboard that works with it. Next up, we have Rayman 2, The Great Escape. Rayman 2, The Great Escape is fun as hell. I really think the Rayman games are great. I actually think this is probably the best Rayman game. I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10. Classic platformer to its very core. Man, it's one of the things that I feel like it aged really well. If you're trying to go back and play an old school platformer that you think best represents the generation and isn't Mario, go with Rayman 2, definitely. Next up, we got Ready to Rumble Boxing and Ready to Rumble Boxing Round 2. Both of these are boxing games, but instead of being all about like ultra hardcore, like be as good in the ring as you can be. Instead, it's really silly. I like it. In fact, in Ready to Rumble Round 2, you can actually unlock Michael Jackson as a playable character, and he has a diamond glove. They're fun as hell. They're always games that get talked about a lot as some of the most interesting Dreamcast exclusives. And even as somebody who doesn't care about the sport of boxing, they're super fun. They're undeniably fantastic games. I'm going to give both of them actually a 9 out of 10. Next up, we have Record of the Lotus War. I actually think Record of the Lotus War is the best hidden gem for the console. Nobody talks about this. It's sold absolutely terrible. It's based on an obscure anime that I've never watched. But it's great. It basically feels like Diablo, but more focused on single player. You go along, you beat up goblins, you get silver, you upgrade your weapons, and it's fantastic. It's absolutely fantastic. But I definitely think it's really long. It's one of those games that takes about 10 hours to really get going. So definitely buy that game if you're looking to fill up like a month with a retro game. Next up is Red Dog. Red Dog is you're driving a tank around on Mars and blowing up stuff, and it's alright. If I remember correctly, wasn't that made by Rockstar? But it's alright. I feel like I'm about to get a nosebleed. If I get a nosebleed, I apologize. I have a spotlight. Okay. Oh, Red Dog, I'm going to give an 8 out of 10. Man, I've been on camera a long time today. Next up is Resident Evil 2, Resident Evil 3, and Resident Evil Code Veronica. All three of these are so fantastic. These are, in my opinion, the freaking pinnacle of the series. They're fun survival horror, they got great stories, they got evil villains, fun heroes. They're the last of the games in that franchise that had tank controls. So if you are a fan of that, like I was, that's really the last place you can get it. Personally, I actually consider Code Veronica the best game in the series. Honestly, straight down, my favorite. I've played through it a bunch of times. I've played through all of them a ton, but all of them. I'm going to have to give... I really can't help it. I have to give all three a 10 out of 10. They're so fantastic. Next up is Revolt. Revolt, super alright. What is that? That's the... you're going along blowing stuff up. Yeah, that's another driving game, or it's a tank game. It's alright. It's whatever. It's so bland and forgettable. I'm gonna give it a 6 out of 10. Next up, we got The Ring of Terror's Realm. This definitely felt like somebody who wanted to establish their own sort of survival horror game to compete with everything else on the console, and it falls short a little bit. It's alright though. I mean, it sort of feels like a cross between like Silent Hill and like maybe Hunter the Reckoning Redeemer. But it's alright. I'm gonna give it an 8 out of 10. Next up, we got Roadsters, which is just about driving. It's another cool driving game, lots of racing, lots of goofiness. I like it. It's a little bit more arcadey, real easy to pick up and play. You can play it for a couple hours, you can set it down for a couple hours, and it's all good. I'm going to give that one a 7 out of 10. Alright, next up is Samba de Amigo! Da, 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 da. Samba de Amigo is like Dance Dance Revolution for your hands. You actually have to pick up maracas. I have it. It's a huge thing. It's behind me because it's so ridiculous. But you actually set down a mat with sensors, and there's a monkey on the screen dancing to different songs, and you have maracas for controllers, and you actually have to do the maraca controllers along with the rhythm. It's weird. The mat broke a lot. That's the biggest problem, is you can't play without the mat, and the machinery broke a lot. So it's just one of those games that, if you can get it to work, it's a solid 8 out of 10 game. It's a 9 out of 10 party game. And if it's broken, then it's a 1 out of 10 game. Next up, we got... somebody go is... so, Rush 2049, which is what it's called in Europe. In America, it's called San Francisco Rush 2049. Man, I love this game. It is all about tricks and goofiness and being not serious at all. Your car's... it's one of those games. So, to put this into perspective, you're driving along on tracks that have all sorts of ramps and loops and stuff, and there's actually a button that's labeled as trick. When you're in the air, you hold the trick button, and your vehicle actually grows tiny jet wings, and you can spin yourself, and the faster you're able, like if you do 70 flips, you get 50,000 points. super great. There's tracks for racing, and then there's also just trick tracks. And I like them both. I'm going to give that one a 9 out of 10. Next up we have Seaman, a game that actually has a... Oh, I put it in the back. It actually has a microphone to it. Seaman, actually, you talk to it. The way you play the game is by taking care of a fish with a face and talking into your controller, which has a microphone, to teach it language. And that's basically the main point, is to raise this fish, educate it, school it in the ways of the world, and eventually it evolves and escapes. And that's it. And it's really bizarre. I like it, though. I can't say it's much of a game. It was kind of one of those early games that was more about the journey than the gameplay. So I'm actually going to give that one a solid 7 out of 10. For its quirkiness, though, I'm actually going to give it a bonus point and say it's an 8 out of 10. Next up we have Sega Bass Fishing, Sega Bass Fishing 2. Both of those are more awesome fishing games. All three of the main fishing games are fantastic on the Dreamcast, and the only people who doubt that are the people who haven't played it. They're stellar. If you haven't played them, you don't understand it. Both of those are 9 out of 10 games. Next up, we got Sega Extreme Sports. It's just like one of those weird compilations where it's like, everybody was trying to be extreme back in the day. This is extreme bicycles, extreme snowboarding, extreme skateboarding. But all of them are kind of watered down. I'm going to give that one a 7 out of 10. Next up we have Sega GT. Super great. Sega GT are super fun racing games. I like them because they have a lot of different styles of upgrade, replacing parts in your car. I don't know, they're fine. I do think that the Xbox version of Sega GT is better, though. One of the big things that I like about Sega GT on the Xbox is that you could actually play custom music. It was one of the first games that let you play custom music in it. So I definitely think being able to build your own soundtrack and go around all those different courses with your own music playing was a really nice touch. So I'm going to say 8 out of 10 on Dreamcast, 9 out of 10 on Xbox. All right, next up we have Sega Marine Fishing, another one of those Sega fishing games that's super good. I'm going to give that one an 8.5. It's a little bit weirder than the others. Next up we have Sega Rally 2. This is sort of in the same vein, a lot more based on drifting. I think this was one of the first games that ever had drifting as a main mechanic. I think that was even in the commercials. But yeah, I'm going to give that one a 9 out of 10. I really like it. Next up we have Sega Smash Pack Volume 1. Inside of Sega Smash Pack it had basically Golden Axe, Classic Sonic, lots of good stuff. It's great. It's sort of one of those things where I kind of like that Sega acknowledged the fact that they came out with so many consoles back to back that they kind of needed to pay homage to their own hardware, and that does a good job of it. Okay, next up is 7th Cross Evolution, a game where you literally are a creature slowly evolving into the best life form you can be. The weirdest part of the gameplay of this is the fact that you actually, edit your genome. You actually put together your DNA to choose exactly how you look. It's a good game, but it's very, very odd. I played a couple hours of it and didn't get super far just because it's not appealing. Like, even as I'm growing stronger, I don't really ever get that draw to it. So I'm going to give it a 6.5 out of 10. Next up, we have Shadow Man. Shadow Man definitely, to me, felt like a ripoff of Soul Reaver. It felt like it was trying to be a puzzly action game about a person who's not quite dead and not quite alive. Some people like Shadow Man more than Soul Reaver. I'm not exactly in that camp. I think it's a very tiny step below it. I'm going to give it an 8 I'll give it an 8 out of 10. Next up, I got Shenmue. Come on. What do I need to say about Shenmue? I personally believe Shenmue is the first truly open-world game ever made. You can interact with every object, talk to every person, get a job, drive a forklift, get in fist fights. So much is possible in this game. To this day, I talk to people who have beaten it and they don't know half the secrets about it. The fact that you can get a freaking Sega Saturn and hook it up in your house and then win games for it. Like, people don't know that. Love it, love, love, love it. It and its sequel, 10 out of 10 games. Next up is Silent Scope, a sniper game. It's still the same basic concept of an on-rail shooter, the big difference being that almost all the levels are from one vantage point. You're on top of a building looking down, typically in an airport or a different building, and there's a bunch of bad guys, and you zoom in your scopes. You like zoom out, you can see the whole level at once, and it'll be like, oh, there's all these bad guys and terrorists running around. You zoom in on particular ones and shoot them. I think they're really, really fun. Much better in the arcade, though, obviously, since in the arcade, you actually get a sniper rifle, whereas in this game, you're getting a paltry imitation of it. I'm still going to give it an 8 out of 10, even for this downgraded console version. Next up is Silver, a game I just cannot get enough of. One of the first, really serious reviews I ever did, and it's terrible, don't go look for it, was on this game. And I like it. It is a hack and slash. I feel like it's more of an action RPG. You have different items, different magic. You beat stuff up with your sword. It actually has full voice acting. Interestingly enough, it's one of the only games on Dreamcast that you can't really bootleg because it's so big it doesn't fit on one disc. So definitely find a copy on eBay and grab it. I'm giving Silver a 9.5 out of 10. Next up is Skies of Arcadia. So a lot of people ask me, if you're a Dreamcast guy, what do you consider the best Dreamcast game? Skies of Arcadia. Seriously, that is it. It is a giant RPG. It's got so much cool stuff about it. There's all these different countries and nations that are all going to war amidst this humongous conflict that stretches from horizon to horizon. There are different combat modes for when you're in dungeons or in the sky. Actually battling awakened gods with your ship is epic beyond words. I wish I could give that a score higher than 10 out of 10, but I can't because it's already perfect. I'm giving that an 11 out of 10. Next up, Slave Zero, a game that people hate on a lot, but I have a respect for it. You're basically playing as a person controlling a giant robot, so you're the giant robot. Think of it as like a beat-em-up. You're going through levels, you're fighting other robots, but the big twist is that for some reason you could pick up giant guns and shoot giant guns as your giant robot and pick up stuff and throw it. I think it's great. A lot of people really don't like it. They think that it's kind of clunky. For what it is, though, I actually find it to be very, very entertaining. I'm giving it an 8 out of 10. I don't care what anybody else says. Next up is Snowcross Championship Racing. It's a game where you're driving snowmobiles, and it's racing in the snow. 7 out of 10 because it's great, but there are 8 billion racing games on the system, and that's not one of the best. Next up is Soldier of Fortune. This is a more serious one. I think this is one of the really good first-person shooters. I like this one a lot. You can really get into the nitty-gritty of planning out how you're going to attack a base and stuff. It's great. I will give it an 8 out of 10. If I remember correctly, that's one of the first games ever made where you can actually shoot particular body parts and it would do different damage. Next up is Sonic Adventure 1 and 2. Both of these are really phenomenal. I like them a lot. People really hate on Sonic now. These Sonic games, I feel like, in history, people liked them when they came out, and then for some reason, over time, people have turned against them, and I don't know why. I still think they're super, super fun. Yeah, the voice acting's bad. Yeah, some of the weird animations of Sonic being like, Tails, we gotta go! That's all weird, but it's still a really fun game. I think both of them are serious 9 out of 10 experiences, especially with the Chow Garden. Sonic Shuffle, that's a game that I have defended a lot. It's Mario Party with Sonic, and it's kind of a board game, kind of a RPG, because you actually used cards to attack monsters. That's a game I can't really explain to you. You have to actually look it up, because it's so weird, you kind of have to watch a full match in order to understand it. I'm going to give that a 7.5 out of 10. Next up is Soul Calibur! One of the best games ever made. Super great. Big, big, big set of characters that all fight totally different with unique weapons, Cool fighting styles. You can stab people. You can hit them with sticks if you're Kalik. It's got a cool little bonus mode where you can actually do a bunch of challenges. I'm giving it a 10 out of 10. Next up is South Park Chef's Love Shack. South Park Chef's Love Shack is a trivia game. Pretty funny, not super great. I think the biggest problem is that so many of the jokes are reliant of it being 1999. Going back now, the humor is really outdated. Next up is South Park Rally, a racing game set in the South Park universe. Sort of the same thing that I feel about some of the other kart racers. When you're just trying to be Mario Kart but dirty, it doesn't feel... I don't know, it doesn't feel fresh. It feels like you're just trying to be a copy of a copy. For what it's trying to be, I give it a light thumbs up. I'm going to give it a 7.5. I actually skipped one here. Where was it? Soul Fighter. Soul Fighter. Fighting game. It's fighting. It's Soul Fighter. 6.5. We're going to move on to the two Space Channel games. Space Channel and Space Channel Part 2. These are like rhythm dancing games. It almost feels like Dance Dance Revolution as an adventure. You go along and there will basically be like aliens doing dance moves, and then you copy them to like zap them. And then towards the end of the game, Michael Jackson shows up, and Michael Jackson helps you defeat all the aliens. They're hardly even games. I honestly feel like they're one of those things that you can watch a playthrough of it and you get just as much out of the experience as if you're actually playing it yourself. I'm going to give them both 6.5 out of 10. Next up is Spawn in the Demon's Hands. I like the Spawn game. It's odd. They're sort of action-adventure type things. They're fine. I actually think that the kind of darker graphic style is cool. That's kind of my favorite thing about it, is seeing Spawn battle demons and use his chain weapons and get his giant axe. I'm going to give that an 8 out of 10. Fun fact, people really despise that now. Next up is Specs Ops 2 Omega Squad. Again, one of these really serious, really heavy shooters. What it does well. I like this one a lot because if I remember correctly, you can actually issue squad commands. One of the earliest games I can remember doing that. I'm going to give that one an 8.5. Next up is two games, Speed Devils and Speed Devils Online Racing. Yes, they have different names, but it's basically the same game, sold with slightly different features. Both of them totally fine. I don't know, man. I've talked about 80 billion racing games at this point. You go around tracks, and you get a bunch of different cars, and you unlock new stuff. I'm going to give them both a 6 out of 10. No, I'll give them a 7 out of 10. I'm starting to doubt myself because I've been sitting in front of this camera for 2 hours. Next up is Spider-Man. Now, one of the first Spider-Man games people kind of forget about, it wasn't really open world. You kind of... The rooftop sections, you're like swinging above clouds. You like can only go from one roof to another. It's sort of like a platformer. And then there's inside sections where you're actually beating people up indoors. They're fine. Their early superhero games were kind of rough. This one's pretty freaking fun, though. I'm going to give that one 9 out of 10. Next up is Spirit of Speed 1937, a retro racing game. Another good one. I'm going to give that one a 7 out of 10 because you race and it's about like the past. Sports Jam. It's a sports game. I don't know if it's any good or it's bad. I've heard negative things about it, though. I'm going to give it a 6. Starlancer. Another game where you're flying around in space, doing missions, trying to kick some butt. Lots of interesting objectives in that game. I have gone pretty deep in it. It definitely, again, feels like one of those games that would greatly benefit from having a flight stick, which the Dreamcast never got. Now we are finally on to the Star Wars games. Star Wars Demolition is a demolition derby game of Star Wars, and it sucks. I'm giving it a 4 out of 10. I genuinely think it is a broken mess. Star Wars Episode 1 Jedi Power Battles is a blast to me. I absolutely get a kick out of it. It's a side-scrolling beat-em-up, but with lightsabers. Different characters, as you use them more, gain different abilities to create force shields or uppercut people with their lightsabers. It's not really well designed. There are platforming sections where the screen doesn't move right, and so you fall to your doom a lot, and when you run out of lives, you gotta start the whole game over. Despite its flaws, I get a real big kick out of it. I've beaten it several times, and fun fact, I actually gave it to a bunch of my friends one year for Christmas as a joke. Next up is Star Wars Episode 1 Racer, which is pod racing. Hooray, pod racing. It's great. It's pod racing. It's super unbalanced. The characters that are heroes in the movie have like super vehicles that just fly along at 1,000,000 miles an hour. Despite how messed up it is, I give it a 7. Did I give a rating to Jedi Power Battles? Jedi Power Battles, I give it 8.5. Now we have 3 different Street Fighter games. Street Fighter 3 Third Strike, Street Fighter 3 Double Impact, and Street Fighter Alpha 3. All of these are serious 9.5 out of 10 games. Extremely well done fighters that are ultra fun. The main difference between these games is the characters you can play as. They have slightly different rosters, but I really like them all. Next up is Stupid Invaders, which is basically like an old school point and click thing where you, these aliens have come down and they're too stupid to actually take over the world, so you're trying to like, you need to open this door, so you need to find a candle that burns this rope, which brings down the key. It's one of those really old school style games. The humor's pretty decent though. So yeah, I'm gonna give that one 7 out of 10. Next up, Super Magnetic Neo! You play as like a guy with a magnet for a hat. This game is surprisingly hard, is the thing I always remember most about it. You're basically cruising along, you have a magnet for a head, and by using your magnet, you can attach or detach to things. So you can like magnetize yourself up onto something and then let go. There's a lot of different puzzle platforms. It's like, yeah, puzzle platforming is how I'd call it. There'll be things that are positive or negatively charged, and by using your positive and negative magnetic charge, you can pull towards objects or push away from them, and it's also how you attack enemies and stuff. It's actually pretty cool. I think it's quirky. I'm going to give that an 8.5. Next up, Super Runabout, another racing game, and another one that's actually pretty good. I'm going to give it an 8. It's a racing game. If you want another racing game, guess what? That's one. Next up is Surf Rocket Racers, a racing game. One that I think is a lot less inspired. It's one of those ones that kind of sits on store shelves just because it's so bland. I'm going to give that one a 6. Suzuki All-Star Racing, which is it's a motorcycle racing game that's actually kind of cool. I feel like it's one of the earlier examples of just really doing track motorcycle racing right. I'm going to give it an 8.5 out of 10. Next up is, oh god, Sword of the Berserk. It doesn't have the extra part of this title, but the end of that title is Guts Rage. Sword of the Berserk can be kind of broken at times. The game has a lot of weird errors where, like, you have this humongous sword that's made for killing demons, and funny enough, happens to be you're in a lot of tight corridors and your sword bounces off the walls a lot. If you can get past the glitches, I do think it's actually a pretty dang fun game. There's a lot of great stuff about it. Slaying really big monsters, hilarious dialogue, over-the-top cutscenes, and I believe there's a little naked fairy that floats around and talks to you. So I'm going to give that one an 8. Next up is Sydney 2000, based on the Sydney Olympics, of course, and it's Olympic Games. You got bobsledding, you got shuffleboard, you got skiing, you got all your typical stuff, but 18 years old. So, it's fine, though. If you really are craving some old-school Olympic, people actually collect some of the Olympic Games, and that one's one of the harder to find. So, yeah, pick that one up. Definitely a good one. I'm going to give it a 7.5. Next up, Techromancer, a a fighting game where you are giant robots with swords and stuff pounding each other's faces in. This is actually a better one. I think that it does a lot of stuff. It's not afraid of just being really odd, and that's what's fun about it. Very anime-ish. It's fun though. I'm actually going to give that a 9. I think that I don't know. I like a game that's just kind of brave enough to be like, screw it, we're going to put in a giant tank and make him fight a teeny tiny guy. Next up is Tee Off, a golf game. As far as golf games go, it's pretty good. I've actually beaten a couple rounds of it, and it's fine. It's golfing, you aim the ball, you power it up, you bash the ball. I don't think it has any licensing to it, though, so there's no Tiger Woods or anything, but yeah, seriously good 7.5 out of 7.5 out of 10 experience. The exhaustion is kicking in. Next up is Test Drive 6. It is probably one of the much better games. I'm going to give it an 8.5. Test Drive 6 is cool. I like it a lot more than Test Drive Le Mans because you're racing on more normal tracks with more normal cars. If I remember correctly, some of the tracks are actually like through city streets that have been like sectioned off. Pretty dang cool. I'm going to give that one an 8.5. Next up, Time Stalkers. This game blows. Is an RPG that is just so crappy. You level up. It's super dumb. I don't like the characters. I don't like the art. It sucks. I've gotten 3 copies of this for free. People keep handing it to me because they just don't like it. I'm giving it a 4 out of 10. Next up is Tokyo Extreme Racer and Tokyo Extreme Racer 2. Both of these are gold mines of awesomeness. You're basically driving around at night through the streets of Japan trying to challenge other racers and climb your way up through the illegal street racing scene. I really like the customization and buying new vehicles, and something that's cool about it is the fact that since you're just fighting people on the highway, where you actually challenge them is always different. So sometimes you'll just be in a spot that has a bunch of traffic and you're trying to zip in and out of cars, or sometimes you'll be in a spot where there's actually a bunch of tunnels and you're trying to like race through ultra tight little corridors, and if you bump the wall you crash instantly. Big fan of both those. I'm going to give both those a 9 out of 10. Next up is Tom Clancy's Rainbow Six and Rainbow Six Rogue Spear. Both these are actually part of the same thing. There's the same game, one's just the expansion for it. These are really, really, really hardcore shooters. Like, you get hit twice, it's game over. I don't like them very much. I think that they're just overly burdened by reality. So I'm going to give both those actually a 6.5 out of 10. Next is Tomb Raider Chronicles and Tomb Raider The Last Revelation. These are both games that are kind of forgotten now, but right after the excess, they did Tomb Raider 2, sold 1 billion copies. Tomb Raider 3 sold 1 billion copies, and so they tried to come out with 2 more really, really fast. And they used the same engine as 3, and one's like sort of a prequel, one's sort of like a side story. They're both just not fantastic. I feel like they scratch an itch for the people looking for like a platformer, dungeon crawling style platformer. Not super. It's one of those things. The problem is that there's so much better stuff in that series. So I'm gonna give them both a 6 out of 10. Next up is Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 1 and 2. Both of those are 10 out of 10 games. You do tricks, you level up Bob Burnquist because he's the best guy in the game. Lots of cool unlockable tracks and all that. I love getting Skate Heaven. The soundtrack introduced me to so much pop and punk that I'd never heard before. Huge respect to those games. I like 2 more than 1 because obviously you can manual and grinding is different. But both of them, fantastic. Hilarious unlockable characters, including Spider-Man. Next up, Toy Commander, which is a weird kitty-type action-y game. Blah, blah, blah. I don't really like Toy Commander very much. I'm going to give that one a 7 out of 10, though, because I understand what it's doing. Next is Toy Story 2, Buzz Lightyear to the Rescue. This is another one of those weird games that's really directed at kids, but actually designed decently. So, if you really are craving to be Buzz Lightyear and save the day with your wrist lasers and actually be the greatest toy you can be, I think it's alright. I'm going to give it an 8, just because it is definitely good for what it's trying to be. Trick Style. I own like 15 copies of Trick Style. It is a hoverboard racing game, and it's really messed up. I don't think it's very well designed. Jesus Christ, there's so many copies of it, though. I'm still going to give it a 7 out of 10, because I feel like I like the track design. I like a lot of stuff about it. I just think that some of the peripheral side of it, some of the outlying factors of it could definitely be better. 7 out of 10. Next up, The Typing of the Dead. This is a Dreamcast typing game where you're basically playing through House of the Dead 2, but you actually, instead of shooting the zombies, you press keystrokes, and each keystroke kills a zombie. Sound weird? It is weird, but it's fun. I'm definitely giving it a 9 out of 10. Next up is Ultimate Fighting Championship. It is a more serious style of wrestling game. It's a cage match style thing, but pretty cool. Wrestling and fighting in arenas. I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10. Next up, Unreal Tournament. Woo, boy, do I love Unreal Tournament. Unreal Tournament, super great. I always change my settings up a lot. You can actually play with a mouse and keyboard on the Dreamcast. It's great playing through it. It's fun playing it through it on any difficulty. The physics are good. Capture the Flag is addictive. Slaying people and getting frags is phenomenal. Almost every single gun in that game is something that does not exist in reality. It's stuff like a gun that shoots chainsaw blades that bounce off walls and rip people up. Solid 10 out of 10 game. Next up is Urban Chaos. This is a game where you're actually playing as a cop, and it's odd. You actually can drive the cop car around, you arrest people. It's all about like trying to solve, I think, your dad's murder. It's weird. I get it. It definitely has that weird vibe of an early open world game where they didn't quite know how to set up missions. I got lost so much in that game because it's just so confusing. But I like beating people up in it. It's fun beating up like meth heads and stuff. So I'm still going to give it a 7.5. Next up, Vanishing Point. Another racing game. And one that's... it feels arcade. I think there's actually an arcade mode in it where you can just jump in with upgraded cars and play split-screen multiplayer. In that, I really like it. Has nothing to do with the old Keanu Reeves movie, Vanishing Point. I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10. Next up, Vigilante 8 Second Offense. It is a car battle game, definitely trying to rip off Twisted Metal. And it does pretty decently. It's got cool cars. You blow each other up. You can really get a lot out of it. You can play through it many times and really get a kick out of it. But it's definitely, there's a reason why it killed the series. I'm going to give it a 8 out of 10. Next up is, oh my god, I'm sitting here for so many hours. Virtua Athlete 2K. Yeah. You are a virtual athlete in the year 2000. I think that's the one where you can play a bunch of different types of sports, almost like mini games. Don't like it very much. I'm going to give it a 6 out of 10. Next up is Virtual Fighter 3. If you never played any of the Virtual Fighters, they're good, but they're definitely they're almost like fighter simulators. You have like a left punch button, a right punch button. Countering is difficult, but when you get good at them, they're very thrilling. I'm going to give that one an 8.5 out of 10. Virtualon Ontario Tanagram. This is a really confusing robot game. You basically can't play it without the custom controller, just because it's so messed up. There's like 5 buttons to lock onto targets and stuff. All the different movements are based on joysticks controlling your boost systems. I'll say with the controller it's a 9, without the controller it's a 5. Next up, Virtual Tennis and Virtua Tennis 2. Both these are actually super fun, and they're really cool because you can play them with movement controls if you want. If you plug in the fishing rod and swing it, it'll actually do the motion controls, so you can seriously do motion controls in the year 1999. They're both really good, actually. If you're looking for a good tennis game, that's it. Seriously, probably one of the best tennis games ever made, and if you think that that's an odd thing to say, it's because you haven't played virtual tennis. Both those are 9 out of 10. Next up is Wacky Racers. Wacky Racers is, again, one of those cutesy kart racers that's trying to be silly. I think it's based on a cartoon, but I never watched it. They're alright. I don't really know the cast at all, though, so it's kind of just like, weird. But I played them a couple hours. I'm going to give it a 7 out of 10. Next up, another kart racers, Walt Disney World Magical Quest Racing Tour. It's Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck cruising around tracks trying to hit each other with things that aren't quite copyright infringement shells. It's fine. I'm gonna give that one a 6, though. I definitely think it's one of the lesser ones on the system. Next up is Wet Trex, which stands for Wet Tetris. It's sort of like Tetris, but you're dropping pieces on a giant board to hold as much water as possible. I actually am a really, really big fan of this game. It's really odd. I was addicted to it for an entire summer. It cracks me up. It's super fun. I like that you get points by the amount of water you can hold at once, how deep you can make your lakes. Playing it versus is a big kick because you can drop nuclear bombs on the other person's map and stuff. I'm going to give that an 8.5. Next up is Who Wants to Beat Up a Millionaire? It is a parody game of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. It's dumb. It's really dumb. I'm going to give it a 4 out of 10. Next up is Wild Metal. It is a game where you're playing as giant robots and going wild. I'm going to give it a 7.5 because it does have some cool elements to it. World Series Baseball 2K1 and 2K2. Both of those are baseball games that I don't know anything about because when I hold a baseball bat, it's usually at the batting cages, and I love going to the batting cages. I don't really like playing baseball games. I'm going to give them 7 out of 10 because I hear they're pretty decent, but I go baseball. Hey! Next up is Worms Armageddon and Worms World Party. Love the Worms games. They crack me up. You're playing as adorable little cutesy creatures with giant, massive weapons of destruction that can make it where you blow up maps. The point is that a bunch of people are on like a tiny 2D map trying to aim and kill every other person on the enemy team. They are eccentric, they're over the top, and they are a blast, both figuratively and literally. Highly recommend both of those. I'm giving them both a 9.5. Next up, WWF Attitude and WWF Royal Rumble. Both are really cool wrestling games, but since I don't really know the fighters, it's hard to get too invested in it. I'm going to give them both an 8 out of 10. And the very final of all 247 North American Dreamcast games is Zombies Revenge, a beat-em-up game where you're going along, fighting different zombies, and some of them are super monsters, and it's ridiculous. It's actually pretty tough. I recommend you play it. There's an alternate mode called Gun Mode where you have super powerful weapons, so you can blast people, and I like it when I play it in Gun Mode. Well, guys, this has been my April Fool's joke to everybody who ever says that I don't talk about the Dreamcast enough. I never want to talk about it again until like the next time I'm running a Top 10 Thursday. I appreciate you all watching this very long video. This is probably going to take about 30 hours to render. I feel like I'm about to die. I've been talking for so many hours. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like, share with your friends, and subscribe if you haven't already. But do me the biggest favor of all and keep dreaming. It's like 3 a.m. and I want to drink a Red Bull because I'm just so tired. I'm about to lose consciousness. Oh my god, you hear my back pop? Oh god. Oh, hi. I'm just working on the next video. If you want to see what it is, go ahead and click this button and you can subscribe. Also, if you click these video links, you can see my latest review and my latest top 10. Now I'm just going to sit here for a minute and wait for you to subscribe. Oh, I guess I could put on these giant glasses. I literally found these on a roller coaster.